Oh, nice.
Oh, my mother-in-law saw your painting and loved it.
Yeah.
And I was like, I will tell her. Yes, I painted it. And I was like, no, I did not. All right, we're going to go ahead and call this study session to order. We have one item on the agenda tonight, which is a discussion regarding the additional amendments to the proposed medical marijuana ordinances. We are definitely doing our due diligence on a very complicated topic, and one that has been very much handed to us by the state. So we're doing the best we can, and I look forward to the presentation tonight.
Thank you, Mayor Clark. Council, we were asked to compile certain information at the last city council meeting, including we wanted to know what other municipalities were charging for their local license fees. Were they charging different medical marijuana establishments different license fees depending on what kind of business they were? And further, could staff prepare more of a breakdown of the types of medical marijuana establishments and types of services that relate to the estimation, the estimated number of time spent by city staff that was presented at the last council meeting? So what we've done and are going to present is information regarding roughly 30 Oklahoma municipalities. And I'll just say, I started with the 25 largest by population in Oklahoma. I then went to whatever cities were within Cleveland and Oklahoma counties that weren't already included in that list. And I managed to get fairly decent information from about 30 of those in the time period we had. So that's why I've come to about 30. Amongst those 30, 15 are the largest by population. We also have general information and evaluation of current licensing and licensing that's currently under evaluation in some towns. Evaluation of the treatment, including how it matches up to the state regulations, whether it's just a wholesale adoption. And then Jane Hudson, the planning director, has more information regarding the breakdown of staff time. So the third page, the top 12 for each MME, this.
Councilman Patron?
I was just going to ask if we have extra handouts since it's not up there that we can maybe give to people.
I've given all the guest
okay.
one.
Sorry. I should have known better. Of course you did.
So on page 3, this chart was really meant to provide you with the best overview of the landscape of medical marijuana establishments that are state licensed in Oklahoma at this time. From my list, I actually, for all 50 plus cities that I looked at all, I went to the OMMA website and determined how many state licenses appeared with addresses in each of these municipalities. This is as accurate as we could get it as of yesterday. So you'll see the top 4 don't vary across dispensaries, growers, and processors. Oklahoma City has the most, Tulsa the second, Edmond the third, and Norman the fourth. After the fourth, it varies depending on city. There's more of a break between the number. There's a larger disparity. So you can see that the top 4 areas in Oklahoma are very well established as those 4, including Norman. The 5 cities that appear in red type, I just put those in red so that you could see, even though they weren't in the top 4, they appeared 3 times. They made top 12 in all of these categories. And of course, because there were some ties, we went beyond 12 in a couple of the categories. Okay, so I wanted to talk about the 3 larger municipalities, Oklahoma City. Actually, Edmond's not larger, it just has more MMEs. But Oklahoma City and Edmond I wanted to start with. They both don't have ordinances currently adopted regarding licensing or zoning, but they do have them currently pending. Edmond will vote on its ordinance on August 26th. I have seen it. It includes fees that are very similar to Oklahoma City. It includes the new state categories, and it has licensing language very similar to our own ordinance. Oklahoma City's, the vote is not known. I don't know when that's going to occur. I know that they had public hearing on it a couple of weeks ago, but I've not seen it listed on another agenda for City Council. Oklahoma City, their ordinance was very bare bones. They literally only did as much as they had to address and comply with the COC process. So instead of calling it a business licensing fee, they literally just called it a COC fee. And the amount for a dispensary would be $615 annually, and grower, processor, researcher would be $750 annually. So that's both Oklahoma City and Edmond, changes that should be implemented very soon.
Councilmember Scott?
What are the new state categories?
So testing laboratory and education facility and storage facility were all added to ours. I will say some of the ordinances already in place in some municipalities already address storage facilities. We only addressed it at this round because we had to in order to comply with state law.
Okay, I remember that now.
Okay,
Councilmember Wilson?
In the category conversation, maybe jumping the gun a little bit. The processor, from what I understand from talking to someone who wants to be a processor, there's a couple of different processing maybe categories. Has the state separated that out? I'm thinking they haven't. And if they haven't, then can we separate it out further and be a little different than the state in that capacity? Have the processor for like the bakery specifically, where they're just spraying on something onto some cookies, and then you have the, if I understand the processes, you have the more intensive processing that's kind of more like an industrial process.
We actually spoke about that today, and hopefully they'll give us an update, so they'll get to
Okay,
that.
maybe I'm ahead, so.
actually, it's perfect timing. I'm kind of
Segue.
introducing that. The reason being because Tulsa was the one municipality that I could recall as of our meeting last week that had some draft of subcategories. I couldn't at that time recall which one it was, but it was processors. And so in discussing Tulsa, because it's also in the top 4, they passed an ordinance on November 28th of last year. It was only zoning. Right now, I understand that Tulsa does require its food handling license or its food processing license to be obtained by dispensaries and processors. That's a $155 plus $5 application fee, so that's $160 per year. But that's because they haven't set up separate licensing categories. But in regards to their zoning, they first heard this ordinance on the meeting before November 28th, and at that meeting, they had a local attorney protest, and specifically on the basis that all processors had been placed in the heavy industrial district, and that due to the breadth of the state definition, that the city should consider subcategories so that some of them could locate within lighter industrial areas. So there was a subclassification ultimately added to the ordinance adopted at the other meeting, but it didn't address it from the perspective of treating certain kinds of processors the same as dispensaries. It really only recognized that there could be some lighter industrial uses, and it kept it within the industrial categories. So we don't really have a lot more information than that yet on what information Tulsa considered in order to do that. So we would recommend getting more information and vetting this so that we can develop a very specific cutout that would ensure that we're going to be able to, I guess, consistently apply our regulations because we'd be starting from the ground up. The state has not subcategorized processors, so we would be the first. So we want to make sure that we're doing it the right way.
So,
Go ahead.
I don't know what the question will be, but I don't understand enough about the process to understand, but what I'm being told is that in the bakery setting, they literally, it's almost like spraying sugar on top of something. That's not going to be detrimental to traffic or like well-being of the neighbors or, things like an industrial. So I'm thinking specifically of the one lady that came the other night, which she already has a bakery. Why can't she just add this manipulation of this product onto her food stuff? So I just thinking about the loopholes and, then how does that, I don't know what the question is more than that I have concerns about making her have to move to an industrial area where she then might not also be able to have her bakery. You know what I'm saying? Are we catching her into a catch-22 and others like her when it could be a simple, kind of like you do the cottage industry stuff, like you can do a certain amount of processing at this level. Does that make sense? Am I making any sense at all? Okay.
Not really.
You do. Shh. Are you even?
But I have a
still
follow-up question, I think it's gonna help you.
Okay.
Councilmember Hickman.
So I think the question is, because I assumed, and this may be a dumb question, I don't know, using the bakery example, that you can't, that the law would not allow a bakery that sold cookies to children in one shelf, but cookies that have been processed, sprayed on with whatever it's called, CBD, whatever, anyway, that have been, whatever, medical marijuana, in the same store, meaning that you're not gonna use your bakery and sell both, MME stuff and non-MME stuff from the same storefront.
I think
Is
it's
that
the
correct?
processing,
You're
though.
correct. The state enforces restricted entry, so
Okay,
children
so
could not.
that's what I assume. So I'm confused in a different way about this bakery question. If it's a matter of that she wants to convert her bakery to become a site where it's a dispensary as well as backside limited processing, that's a different question. And does she wanting to do that at her current facility and has a current level of zoning? But it's not a matter of you can use an existing, I'll say bakery or any site like that, because I assume that the law is not going to allow them to use equipment for processing MME stuff, but also non-MME stuff in the same facility, right?
I would have to look at the food handling guidelines. There were particular guidelines passed for processors that, because they're state enforced, I'm certainly nowhere near an expert on. I would venture a guess that you're correct, that there are guidelines not allowing use for non.
Because you could have contamination, or you could have cross-pollination, whatever they call it. Okay.
All right, we've got Patron, Bierman, Wilson.
Okay, so maybe it follows off the tail end of what he was talking about. My understanding is that if they are using baking as the example, baking the cookies, you can't buy the cookies in the same place that they're being baked by law. The processing is separate from the dispensary, the retail purchase. So we wouldn't have the problem of, the general public in there. However, I don't think that it's correct that there is an age. I think that there are ways around, and kids can go into a store that is actually a dispensary, because it's just part of it's a dispensary, the rest of it's a store.
Yeah.
So,
That's how our stores.
so I think that's going to be moot anyway. They have two businesses in one storefront.
Okay. I was more talking about the selling of
Right, but I mean,
treated and non-treated product.
they both are there. You could be selling Oreos that are regular Oreos and special Oreos as well. But I guess what I was hoping to hear is that we would be discussing for the zoning a processor subcategories. My biggest worry with this is just general safety. I mean, as far as so I was trying to think my way through this, that maybe combustible chemical extraction or hazardous inhalants versus none of that. So if you're just rolling the joints, I guess, as that being the use of your processor license, because I would assume that that's probably a pretty popular product for every dispensary, old school 70s style, then they need to be able to sell that and it not be a special use permit every single time to come before us. That's ridiculous. And the same being said for if you're spraying loaded sugar onto your product, that shouldn't be special use either. It's a lot different than, to me, in my mind, than burning butane or however that works.
Well,
Councilmember Bierman.
I, like everyone else here, know nothing about this industry, as we all are making sure that we say. However, that's the point that I was trying to get at, is that I think that there is a very distinct difference between the chemical extraction and the baking. And I from what I understand, I'm not an expert in the state law either, but from what I understand, there is nothing that disallows someone to use a bakery to make product, regardless of what happens on the retail side. I don't necessarily know what's going on the retail side, but someone should be, in my opinion, someone should be able to have two contracts, one to make regular cookies for Norman Public Schools and one to make, special cookies for the Cannabis Cup, so I would like to not hit them multiple times with multiple license fees and or require them to go into a light industrial area, or even a heavy industrial area for that whole operation. So
Agreed.
I don't know where we split that baby or how we can or if we can, but to me that seems to be along with the issue of the pre-rolls that again, maybe we're prohibited by state law from not requiring a processor's license for that, but if we can just say if you already have a dispensary license, even if you have to apply for a processor's license, maybe it's 0 fee if you already have another license in a different category. I feel like we have to address that separate and aside from what the fee is. So,
Speaking of separate and aside, I do want to take a moment to clarify that we're clearly working on fixing this, which I'm excited about, but it cannot be addressed in what we're doing on Tuesday. So we're going to have to start the full process again. But I think it's important to let everyone know that we are working on perhaps the first subcategorization, and I love the zero processing fee if it's for these specific items and it's under this. It's a great idea. But I wanted to clarify that we're not going to solve this issue Tuesday. We're going to move forward with what we need to with the state deadline. But we've talked about for community planning and transportation having that come back as early as September. So making sure we are moving forward on it.
at least we could deal with the price of it, because I feel like we might hit them with the fee and then decide, well, we're actually going to take a different track when it comes to zoning and permitted use.
Go ahead, Brenda.
Currently, several people have multiple licenses, and so they're paying that fee multiple times. If they have a processor and a grower, they're paying $200 for $100 for that, $100 for that. So if we reverse that, we just have a situation where we already have. And even with our other licenses, there are lots of establishments that have multiple licenses. You may want to address that in the fee area, but
I don't mind them having multiple licenses. It's just if we're stacking triple digit fee on top of triple digit fee, then
Especially if we create the subcategory.
Right.
That would seem like it's
maybe
not
a
the
bulk
full
discount on fees. Buy two get one free, something like that.
Councilmember Wilson.
Well, I think my concern, which won't be addressed on Tuesday, is a little more along the lines of existing businesses being able to add some portion of the marijuana industry to their revenue stream without having to move to an industrial district or something like that. So just put that in your hat for the future thing, and then I'll defer the rest of my question for when we address that.
Councilmember Scott.
Well, I have a couple of questions, but I'm asking them real short. So, can we open zoning to all facets of the cannabis industry? Can we say, whatever you're doing, processing, dispensing, educating, whatever, can be open in all commercial industrial zoning areas?
Are you asking,
Yeah.
I mean, as a simple zoning decision, that would, I guess, be either adding the categories to every single zoning district or repealing what we already have in place in its entirety. If I'm understanding the question correctly.
So, what I'm saying is, part of this issue, I think, with the processing, as far as the pre-rolls or even this cookie conversation is concerned, it's about it's happening in commercially zoned districts, and that's the issue, right? So can we open up commercial zoning to processors or educators or researchers
By right.
or indoor grows? I don't know. Yeah.
So
Did you-
the ordinance that's currently being considered is adding categories: education facility, testing laboratory, and storage facilities. So we are deciding where to put those right now. And the staff recommendations hasn't changed through the draft that was presented about, at the first meeting here about 2 months ago. So those are where they are, and those are subject to discussion at the next meeting, of course. As far as processors, we have not touched those zoning uses in this amendment, which is why I understand we are going to come back through the full process for it. And I'd like to take a moment to summarize what I think I'm hearing to make sure I'm understanding the issues that we want to address. At the meeting a week ago, I heard, I think very similar to what Councilmember Wilson is saying about certain processors feeling that their processes are very similar to dispensaries because they don't have extraction happening on site, and that maybe they should be treated more like dispensaries, and could we consider subcategories to accommodate a treatment such as that? So that's the first issue I really had on my list. And from tonight, I'm understanding there is some question about whether established bakeries might also be able to be a state processor that is of the category we just discussed, where they're not extracting on site, and would our current zoning accommodate that? And that's a question, I guess, whether our bakeries are typically located in the same areas that we've allowed dispensaries.
I have a question.
And so I understand that to be now a second kind of facet of that question. And we can address that and vet that. And I'm in a very similar place with you, Councilmember Wilson, where there are just so many questions. And that's exactly what we're trying to do right now, is look at the suggestions, look at what Tulsa did, look at what any other municipalities might be doing, so that we don't have surprises and loopholes and things we didn't anticipate, because this is such a new business. I am really digging into the law, but I am not understanding the business. So we need to get some of that feedback from some more expert and professional sources.
Councilor Patron.
I would take that one step further, actually, and say that not all extraction is even treated the same, because some of it is, I learned today, that you can do extraction just with ice water. So that's not the same to me as using something that's combustible, for example. So to me, that's, let them extract it as well if it's not using, harsh chemicals or fire. Or however, I'm saying, something natural. And then I guess the next part of it is, if we're not able to pass this on Tuesday, when can we reasonably expect to be able to tell these businesses, since a lot of them are, in flux with leases, that we would know that we would be able to pass this and answer the questions?
I think staff is looking into the timeline. I'm not certain if one is actually firmed up yet. We want to move absolutely as soon as possible. I would recommend at least a few weeks to gather information from out of state. We have some sources out of state in states like Colorado that have seen really every facet of this business. We're hoping to get some of that information back. So hopefully getting it scheduled on a council conference within the next month, if that meets Brenda and Mayor Clark's needs.
It's got to go through Planning Commission, CTC, and all that.
Right.
Councilor Wilson.
I think what I'm hearing is that we actually need to focus on the fee, and that this zoning stuff is a conversation for another day. Is that what I'm, okay, because I got a bunch of questions, but I'm happy to hit these on another day. I'm not trying to correct my fellow council members, but never mind on my question, unless it's about.
Councilor Holman.
We are going to be voting on this.
That's what we're going to be voting on Tuesday, though, and this is a problem.
The
Yeah,
main,
because, back to Councilmember Scott's question. So instead of requiring a special use permit for processors to be in a commercial strip mall, what is the reasons why we shouldn't just allow it by right, same as a dispensary? Dispensary can go in a strip mall, and we just say, if you're a processor, you have by right the ability to go in a strip mall too.
Well, as far as the policy, some of the information we would bring you in order to evaluate that would be impact on surrounding neighborhoods. Commercial very commonly backs right up to residences. We would want to give opportunity on that subject for discussion and notice, which is why, as far as the process goes, we would need to go back to the beginning. And that.
I'm sorry, Beth. There's businesses that can by right go into a commercial strip mall that have obnoxious odors. Restaurants, auto repair shops. There's lots of businesses, I think, that can have impacts on the surrounding areas that we do not require a special use permit. And so why should we require processors to, is what I think we're asking. And if we allowed it by right, that could solve a lot of, I think, the confusion that we're having. Sorry, thank you. Beth.
Oh, no, and you're right. Those decisions are fully within City Council's purview. I'm only speaking to the process, the fact that that type of amendment only came to our attention really about a day before the actual public hearing. That is not enough time to really get us to vet that issue and get the notice out for that. That type of amendment's just never been part of this ordinance. So that's why we're recommending that we have to go back to committee.
So can you clarify for me exactly what it is that we need to accomplish on Tuesday? Bare
Decide
minimum.
on the fee amount.
Okay. So there, what else
Zoning's
by the
not gonna be on
state?
there?
Yeah, with the state, creating new categories, or
We had to
Oh,
vote on
okay.
this by next Tuesday, or we were going
Yeah.
I thought we could
Yes.
vote on everything except for the fee on.
Yeah, I thought the fee was the only thing we didn't have
That
to
was an
do.
oversimplification. So the pending amendment on the floor is to decide the fee amount. I think the motion that's pending is to change it to 100?
go back to 100.
Okay, and so that would need to be voted on before a final decision on the amount if it's not going to be 100. Beyond that, there will need to be a final vote on the whole ordinance as a package. And that ordinance includes adding the categories for licenses and for zoning uses for storage facilities, testing laboratories, and education facilities. It places them in the zoning districts that are listed currently within the ordinance. A vote with or without amendments will happen on that. The licensing categories are added, various little grammatical changes are throughout the ordinance, and we are adopting state definitions again.
So what does the state need from us? Because it sounds like there's interest in changing what we have in the zoning ordinance, which we have to go through the full process again. So what is the state? There's a deadline of August 29th. So what is that deadline?
So the state's laws, the two main bills on medical marijuana are going to become effective August 29th. Our ordinance is currently drafted to pass with an emergency clause that would allow it to go in effect on the same day. And that is because the state on August 29th will be establishing these new uses and could theoretically, I don't know if they will, but they could theoretically be issuing licenses for those.
So we need to create the uses.
We need to create the uses, and we need to create the certificate of compliance process that ties it into our licensing process that would allow us to give them their certificates of compliance. Because now, effective August 29th, they will have to come to municipalities before the state will issue their license.
So at the bare minimum, that's what we need to do. But if we want to change all of the zoning that we're looking at, we still have the full process to go through, which at the earliest, if we have CPTC towards the end of September, we wouldn't even see it on council until October. So people who are waiting, planning commission, so people would have to wait while they're figuring out leases and stuff until that process is done, but at least they would be waiting knowing that we're doing it right. So the bare minimum would be set some sort of fee, again, while we're in the zoning as it is, just to hold something. So, and create these uses, so when the state creates it, we're with it, but then we can go ahead and relook at all of it one more time, now that we know more about this industry as a whole. Councilmember Hickman.
Well, that was kind of my question, is the current ordinance that's on council agenda, did it go through the planning commission?
Yes.
So that was the question I had, is all this discussion about maybe all these changes to the zoning aspects of the ordinance. I mean, I don't know for sure what the law is, but I think that it does raise concerns if we're going to make significant changes from the zoning perspective. You know, do we have to go back through the planning commission process? You know, the public notice, because if I'm a person, a certain zoned person, and now, you know, there's a change to what's allowed or not allowed in my zone, and I didn't get noticed before, I'm not sure if we're meeting the requirements that we have to meet to go through the proper process. And so, as much as we may all want to get this done and maybe vote it on Tuesday, are we even capable of doing it
No.
because of the legal
We're not.
standards, restrictions on us?
Right, and that's why we would recommend that any changes to processor licensing definitely go back to the beginning of the process.
Okay. So other than the zoning, the uses that are in the current ordinance that's on the agenda, and the zones associated with it, we really can't do anything outside of that from dealing with the zoning part of this current ordinance. Is that a fair summary?
That's fair, yes.
Okay, and I don't think there were issues with that I recall from the debate we had last time. So really the issue left is plugging in the fees for the uses that are on the books or that will be on the books with this amendment to the ordinance. And if we want to create other subcategories for processors or whatever later and define the zones for that, that's going to have to go through this process of the planning commission and back to council, which will be a few months at least.
Yes, and I may have heard a comment tonight that we consider waiving a fee for processors in the licensing that we're considering now. I would recommend that if we are going to subcategorize processors for zoning, that we wait to do it for licensing so that we can do it consistent with each other.
Yeah. We don't have a definition of a processor part 2 in the zoning ordinance right now to create a separate fee for that.
Councilmember Patrone, Bierman, Scott.
And then as a follow-up, if we pass this on Tuesday the way that it is now, are we saying that all dispensaries that are selling joints are in violation of our zoning and that any neighborhood person can walk in and say, call the city and say, lock their doors? Fine them? I mean, what?
So we have adopted the state's definition and thus far deferred to the state in the interpretation of its categories. I have heard too comments that perhaps you can't sell rolled joints in dispensaries. I don't personally know the answer to that one. I don't know that the actual dispensing of a joint would constitute acting as a processor because the definition doesn't quite match up. But the state has set that definition.
That makes me nervous that we would be putting all of those businesses at risk
If we don't.
if we don't do something about it.
I would feel that while we're working on issues, doesn't that tend to be the standard where when we're actively working on finding a solution, they're not fined? Is that how that works, or would this be a state issue that would?
It's a state issue.
Okay.
If we haven't created a zoning category that makes them compliant.
Okay. Councilman Bierman.
But I think the point that everyone has kind of been circling around is that we already have existing zoning for this. The processor zoning is already done. We're just adding storage warehouse, testing laboratory. So currently already, everyone who is technically processing by rolling joints in their dispensary is already in violation.
That's what I mean. So
So we don't have the opportunity to change anything with this ordinance because we can't go through the full process. What we pass next Tuesday doesn't have anything to do with current processors. It doesn't change anything one way or the other for current processors or
Unless we
people
do-
who are
unless we-
processing.
We can do it emergency. We can add it in and do it as an emergency.
Yeah, but I also have a real problem with blowing the door open on precedent for just making random emergency changes to zoning. So, I guess this was a good opportunity for these concerns to be brought up and to start the process for making those changes, but this isn't the vehicle for that, because the vehicle for that was when we set the zoning in the first place, but we didn't know back then. So, yeah, we go through the process to change it, but what we're doing on Tuesday is only for storage warehouses, testing laboratories, and I forget what the third. Education. So, to me, that's the difference. If we were doing this original zoning for processors and we had this information and we had gone through this whole process and we're at the point where we were going to pass it and all of these concerns were brought up, absolutely we would have the opportunity to go in and change it. But this isn't even about that. What we're doing, the licensing, yes, and the fees associated with it, I think we have the opportunity to not do multiple hits on people for the cost of having both the licenses for doing both. But when it comes to the zoning itself, I have a lot of hesitation to totally change the precedent on how we make zoning decisions in this city just because of this one case. So that's where I'm at with it.
I would second that. We are working on it. I mean, I don't know what a few more months would kill.
I know it's difficult. For me, the fee, though, if we can address the fee of having those multiple licenses, that's what we can do before Tuesday to prevent at least that double hit on people. So,
Yeah, we're
Councilman-
required by law to post the title of the ordinance to give notice of what we're changing. And that is published before Planning Commission, and it's published when the ordinance is considered by council. This is outside of what we were amending, and so that's why we feel like we have to go back, because we didn't provide adequate notice under state law and under our own requirements. So that's why we can't make these kind of zoning changes that affect the zoning in this way on the floor, like we do other ordinances.
Councilmember Scott?
Again, a couple questions, just need like some real straightforward answers so that I'm totally understanding. What is the difference between the dispensary zoning and the processing zoning? They can both be in what type of zoning district?
Our current zoning for dispensaries is that they are a special use in RO. They are permitted use in C1, C2, TC, CR, C3, I2, MUD. They are special use in M1. They are special use in I1.
And then for processing?
Processors are special uses in C1, C2, C3, and MUD mixed use. They are permitted in I1, I2, and M1.
So the issue is the additional license that would, if somebody is processing by rolling joints, then they would need an additional license because they would technically be needing two, correct? This is the problem. The problem is that, right, well, these are both special use for dispensary and for processing. They're already a dispensary. They are also selling pre-rolls, which is according to the state, I suppose, the processing parts, right? So they need an additional license, and they would have to apply for another special use before they could sell the pre-rolls, is what I'm understanding.
Legally, yes, that is the way the law
So
set up.
that's what this issue is that people are having with the changes that we're making on Tuesday, as far as the pre-rolls are concerned. They would have to get an additional license.
No, I'm sorry. Nothing that we're doing on Tuesday actually changes that. It has been that way since we passed our original zoning back last year.
Okay. So people are just tripping about it because we are talking about it.
Yes.
Okay.
It's become a lot more a part of a discussion. It did not come to our attention until the night before this last council meeting, but now that we have the information, we can start to vet it.
Okay. Thank you for clearing that up for me.
Councilmember Holman?
So the issue being that it's not dispensaries selling pre-rolls, it's dispensaries having flour and converting those into pre-rolls themselves and then selling them. But there is debate about whether that is considered processing. And currently, many dispensaries do not believe you have to have a processing license to make pre-rolls. So therefore, this zoning would not impact you if that's the case. So what I've been really trying to find clarity on is, do you need a processing license to make pre-rolls? From what I understand in my research so far, the answer is no.
So it's not an issue.
That's what I was
correct.
trying to ask just a moment ago.
The way I understand it, but if you do have to have a processing license to make pre-rolls, then this zoning thing would be an issue, because then every dispensary in Norman that wanted to make pre-rolls would have to come get a special use permit because they're all located in commercial strip malls.
And we're just adopting the state definition, so really it's how the state law is interpreted.
Yeah. So I think that might be a longer, that's where there's confusion, where I'm seeing it is rolling pre-rolls processing or not, and are you required? I don't think so, so I don't think it's a problem. But if it is, and I'm wrong, then our zoning could require every dispensary in Norman that's in a strip mall would have to come get a special use if they want to continue rolling joints themselves. And so, and then I guess that would be a business decision for them to make if they think it's worth it or not. But that's where I've seen the confusion so far, and from my perspective.
So we may be doing a bunch of work on that specific topic when it is a non-issue until we get some sort of final discussion of this and decision from the state.
Have we asked OMMA?
Right. I can reach out to OMMA and ask them about their interpretation of that if they do have a final interpretation of that.
Does a dispensary need a processing license to roll their own pre-rolls?
Okay.
And that, I think that would clear up confusion. Because if we do, then I'm gonna have to go get one. So,
So that's what I understood was what you'd said.
yeah,
And so I think we're on the same page.
I think so.
Okay.
But it is something that would be subject to the state's interpretation because we've adopted that. So,
All right, let's talk about fees.
okay, so to summarize the fee discussion we've already had, we talked about Oklahoma City and Edmond, which are going to be soon putting in place ordinances establishing license fees for dispensaries of $615, $750 for growers and processors. And Edmond has some of the new categories also getting a $750 fee. I think Edmond has some lingering questions though about education facilities. They don't have a proposed fee for that yet. Tulsa has only so far applied its food processing local license, which is $160 a year. Okay, so the 5 that appeared in red on the first chart that I showed you, I'm just calling them the runners-up. I wanted to summarize them very quickly for you, just based on the fee information. So Lawton, their fee is variable because they also did not establish particular fees. They have more general business fees that apply, and in this case, they call it a change of use fee. It's variable because, as I understand it, it can vary depending on the types of uses and inspections required, as well as the area of certain processes, the size of the building. At any rate, I couldn't give you a very good example of even a range for that one, but they do have a fee. They don't have zoning yet, and they aren't sure if any amendments are planned right now. Broken Arrow has an $1,000 initial, $750 renewal for grower processor dispensary. No, none of the new categories are there yet, of course. They have zoning, and they aren't sure about any amendments coming up. Ardmore surprisingly had a lot of medical marijuana establishments for its
Good for
relative
them.
size.
On the border of Texas.
Location could be a factor.
Yes.
And so it has a $2,500 initial fee, and that's to say it has a $2,000 fee with a $500 application fee, and so the renewal is just $2,000. And it has no zoning in place, but I did hear that they are considering amendments in the near future. Muskogee sets $750 for all of them. It does have zoning passed, and it may also be updating. Shawnee only applies its general business license at this time. It did pass in this initial zoning, and they also have some amendments planned. I could not get a lot of information on that. Their zoning was one of the first passed, so it has a lot of setback information in it that I would anticipate is probably not going to be in a future version. And these are just interesting ones that I thought you should consider. Tecumseh's right down the highway. Its business license for all is $1,250, and it does have zoning passed. Hera, $1,300 initial, $1,200 renewal for grower and processor, $700 initial, $600 for dispensary. Interestingly, Hera has no dispensaries with state licenses. It has 18 growers and 5 processors, though. And I just wanted to give this last bullet point.
Buildings in there.
Nakoma
yeah,
Park
it's here.
and Slaughterville, as an example, they both passed full licensure regulations with fees in excess of $1,000. But to date, Nakoma Park has 3 state licensed establishments, all growers. Slaughterville has 1 dispensary.
Councilmember Scott.
I'm looking at this here, the timing. So I appreciate the breakdown of how much time is going to each like different category for cannabisness. So, because last week when we looked at the PowerPoint, it appeared that it was just, this many hours of staff time spent, and this was all that we collected. But I feel like with this breakdown of dispensary, grow, and process, it feels like we can make a different decision about the fee structure. It looks like the dispensaries don't take as much time as the grows, except for in phone call hours, and they take more.
Can I say one thing real
Yes.
quick? So 2 things I need to note. First of all, on fire review, that was for the 4 inspectors that they have on staff. The fire review did not include the fire protection engineer who comes over to Development Services to do plan review. I didn't find that out until late in the day, so I apologize, I didn't have a chance to update that, but, I can, but realistically, he would probably mirror the, meeting time with applicants, plan review, and the research and code, discovery. Those would be the three things that he would I'm sure he does phone calls and stuff like that, but I was just trying to real quick look to see what we would add him into, so that would also be another individual to add those hours there. And then under the planning review, what she gave me actually is a weekly breakdown, and that was only for one of the plan reviewers. There's another individual in there, so I mean this needs to be cleaned up just a little bit, but I wanted to get what I could.
Okay, so what I'm heading toward is like a different fee for each of these, for the dispensary, for the grow, for the processor, because it seems like not as much time is spent on each one. And right now it sounds like we're gonna have, if like everything passes next week with no amendments or discussion or whatever, that it's gonna be an $850 fee for each one, no matter what. But even though we're not spending as much time on each. And so what I'm thinking is that we would have a fee structure that varies, because if grows are taking more time, maybe it's more appropriate to raise that back up to the $1,200. And if dispensaries are taking less time, maybe it's more appropriate to lower that to $500 and, keep the processing at $850 or whatever. So I don't know if that makes sense to do or if that doesn't make sense. I'm asking for, because you're the one who is spending time with all of these people, and you and the fire and chief or the fire inspector.
I think I agree that the dispensaries are not taking as much time as the grow and process. For the most part, there's so much code that has to be reviewed. The fire guys are actually at a conference today doing training for the inspections that they do. So I can definitely see that. I think that for the grow process, they're continually coming up with different methods, the CO2, all the combustible stuff and everything. And those really can, as everybody's pointed out, those can be a real hazard, so we need to be very careful with those.
I understand. So I guess my question, just before we move on, is if it would be appropriate to have basically different fee structures for each, rather than the same across the board. Yes? Okay, thank you.
Councilmember Patron.
How much of these need to be repeated every year? How much work does it take the second year versus the first year?
Well, once the building permit's issued, unless they have additions, alterations, or make changes, then we wouldn't have any building permits, but they would have to license annually, and with the new COC requirements, we have to do that annually. Am I correct on that?
Yes.
Okay, yeah.
So they have to show up, how many, I guess what I'm asking is the amount of hours that go into getting it started, the first year versus the next year. Because I know as a liquor store, we didn't even really see the city ever again. We continue to pay $12.50 a year. So I'm asking and you're saying they do show up and walk through once. Is that one person? Is it 5 people? What's that look like?
So, do you want to answer that?
There are several signatures that they'll have to get for their COC, similar to what alcohol does today. So each one of those signature lines is a different person that's coming out, a different department, a different, whether it's building code or fire or, there's several of those. So there's about 5-ish, I think, if I recall, for the marijuana. There's 4 for alcohol. So there's a little bit of difference there. And also for the growers, anybody going into those facilities will have to have hazmat suits.
Right.
for
I can see
contamination
growers
purposes.
as this is it's a
So,
different animal.
I'm assuming they would be disposable ones that they could pitch, but, so every one of those inspectors that went into each one of those would have to put one on, take it off, put another one on to go in another one, because of the cross-contamination, is my
Okay.
understanding. So I'm saying 5 different people, 5 or 6 different people, depending on what all the categories end up being on the COC, because they're
So-
looking at different things.
Right, so if the dispensary versus process, look what she's got it broken down here. Dispensary, grow, process. So grow sounds, I agree, it sounds very, a lot to that. But the dispensary and the process on year 2, year 3, is it every bit as difficult to get all of these different signatures that you're going to need every year to continue in operation, or is it?
Well, that piece will be the same. The COC piece will be the same. Like Jane was saying, all the upfront work to get in business to begin with and get your building permit and all that, and answer all these questions about code, that may be a one-time hit unless you make changes, but the inspections will be the same each year. They'll have to go through all the same things that they're reviewing.
Do we
I don't
reasonably
see that
expect
being
staff
different.
hours to come down on year 2 for for year 2 of dispensary and process businesses?
Not for the inspection part of it, but for the rest of it, yes.
Okay, if we're not trying to make money off of it, perhaps we can make it come down year 2s to reflect that?
My understanding is they're doing the same process each year.
They're doing the same certificate of compliance process to get their signatures to send to the state. That is the same. But all of the back end of talking about building code requirements to set up their establishment, that all happens at the front end. And so that would not
It would not happen again, so
reoccur every
less
year.
staff hours year 2 on.
Right, for that purpose, unless they make changes or add things.
Councilmember Hickman and Scanlon.
It seems logical to me that the first time staff goes out to a site to do the COC, it's going to take longer, because the first time they're doing this inspection at this location. Then when they come out year 2, they may be following the same process and may have the same number of inspections. But it would seem that as we get, we're going to get more efficient, I would think, as a staff, as we do more inspections, and therefore probably not take as long, because we will have built our processes and our checklists and probably be more efficient in going back into the same facility, second or third or fourth time each year. We'll know where things are, be able to probably move through it more quickly. And so it seems logical to me, and I think this is what Councilmember Patron was getting at, is that the renewal fees could maybe be a little discounted from the initial fee, and that's what it seems like some municipalities have also done, is there's an initial fee that's maybe a little higher, and then year 2 renewal fees are a little bit are discounted, and that seems logical to me. I mean, from that perspective, I think a lot of our fees, we don't have renewals, but in this instance, we have to, in a sense, because we have to follow the state law on the COC process. So we do have to have staff spend time going through that process, but hopefully we can build efficiencies in years 2 and 3 to where the fee doesn't have to be as much, so that because I don't think we want to, and I'm not sure if we can legally, make it a profit center, because then it's maybe not a fee, but a tax. It's my understanding of the fundamental difference in those two things. So I would support, a slightly discounted fee for the renewals, and I would agree with council, with their others that having a different fee for the different categories seems to make sense. I just roughly kind of added up the hours for the dispensary, the grow, and the process and grow, and actually the process one shows the lowest number of hours, but I think that a differentiation between the fees for those 3 categories makes sense to me.
Councilmember
has
Scanlon,
those.
Councilmember Wilson.
I was just going to say, I'm in violent agreement with my colleagues across the table that the initial fee ought to be higher. Intuitively, it should be higher, because we're all learning, we're all plowing new ground. There will be efficiencies, as we just heard, as we go on. That's implied by some of the stuff that we've seen here, where other cities are charging an initial fee and then a renewal at something less. They've obviously discovered the same thing. My only bottom line, I guess, is I don't want to see us losing money, be it initial or renewal. I don't think we're a charity.
Okay. Councilmember Wilson?
My math says that we are spending 9 staff hours on dispensary, 11.25 staff hours on grow-only permits, and 25 staff hours on process and grow. That tells me that we need to maybe tier it according to those man hours spent. Woman hours probably, but and so I would support that kind of a system with a nod to the subsequent years being less.
So you
due,
don't,
due to the lower, especially on the process and grow, I think those have, well, no, maybe I'm saying that wrong. Those actually have the same amount of COCs, don't they? Year to year.
They will all require a new COC
They all will
every year.
require, okay,
So it's really for the right process and grow.
yeah.
Are those separate?
Dispensary,
What we
Only
have on
grow
here
only.
is permit types: dispensary, grow only, and process and grow. And then if you just add up and divide out, it's 9, 11, and 25.
what about processing only?
I don't think there's a processing only on here, so.
So I'm sorry to interrupt, but the state has informed us that they will require a separate COC for each. If they have both state licenses, they will require the separate COC for each.
Can you get a processing only license?
Yes.
So there is a fourth one.
Well, these are just,
Processing grow.
There's not a processing.
This is what's been permitted.
these are just our
Currently.
records, right?
Yeah,
So nobody has applied for a process only license, according to what we've got right here.
I think what this denotes is a lot of the projects we've seen that can include both processors and growers, people who have both licenses from the state.
Oh.
There are no combined licenses that I'm aware of.
Oh,
You have to get them separate.
Yeah.
To get them
And
separate.
we do have separately licensed processors.
So we need to come up with fee for a dispensary, a grow, and a process.
right.
And to
An
get to
initial
council,
fee and a renewal fee.
following up on Councilmember Scott's question about can we do 3 different, I did have one example that was not included in my PowerPoint. City of Mustang is the only one I found of the 30 that has separate. They do $2,500 for processor, $1,500 for grower, $600 for dispensary. And then, of course, I think, as Councilmember Scanlon pointed out, Ardmore and Broken Arrow have the initial renewal structure that we've also discussed.
Councilmember Holman.
Yeah, that's kind of what this whole conversation, I was trying to think of, like, in year 2 of inspecting a dispensary, what does that inspection even consist of? Like, what are you doing? What are we doing? What are we looking for? I mean, I think you're just walking through the building and walking right back out.
Well, what that certificate of compliance tells the state is that you meet all of our zoning regulations, all building code requirements, all fire codes. So anything that you could have done during the year that now makes something in your building not compliant, so they have to check for all of that. So that's what that certificate of compliance is saying. You meet all of these requirements that the city has.
It just kind of seems like, the first time you're doing a thorough inspection, you're looking at everything, but the next year you've seen that dispensary, and it seems like over the years it would just become yeah, I'll stop by, and hey, all right, there you go.
Oh, yeah, that, but
Well, I think that
I don't
is
disagree
how it
that-
is
that
already.
after they get more familiar with their process and what they're looking for, that yes, that will probably get quicker each year, but they still will have to review it. They will still have to look at everything.
Councilmember Scott.
So what I think I'm hearing is that we all agree that there should be a tiered structure for dispensary, or at least most of us. I haven't heard from Councilmember Bierman. It's been a little quiet, but I feel like we are talking about doing a tiered structure. Just calling you out down there. Sorry. And I don't know, I guess, I feel like 600, 900, and 1,200 may be appropriate for however staff's time is spent. However, I disagree that it should be lowered the following year. I don't think we have enough data to really justify that right now. I think that we need to keep it consistent, and then if we hear feedback from our dispensary saying this is excessive, you guys just walked in, walked out, then we can revisit at that time lowering the, I guess, secondary after the initial cost. Does that make sense? Thank you, the renewal, yeah. But at this time, I would support, again, a tiered structure and maintaining that consistency until we have enough data to justify lowering the renewal fee.
Councilmember Wilson and then Patron.
I am assuming that all fees and permits that have currently been issued, those are just done. We're not retro feeing anybody. That's not a
No,
thing,
but
right?
when they get their renewals next year, it'll be
It'll be
whatever fee
shocking.
you
They'll be
establish.
subject to this new.
I'm sorry, Councilmember Scott, was the 900 applicable to processors or growers?
Depends on how this time is spent. is it more time is spent with growers, it looks like? So I would think the grower would be the 1,200, and this is just me like throwing out numbers basically, but 900 would go to the processors, I guess then. I don't know. If that is how the time is best or like most easily distributed.
I would like to verify with my staff before we say which one is the 900 and 1,200, simply because I know with growing, there's different methods that they grow with, but there's also different methods that they process with, and so I would like to just take a minute to verify with them, unless I have someone that wants to speak to that right now. Okay, so I would just like a minute to make sure, and yeah.
Like I understand, yeah, the different growing. I don't know so much about I know a little bit about the differences, and I don't want it to be more difficult for y'all. I want it to be like pretty quick, and like the less time you guys have to spend on each and every person, I think it's better on staff, and it's also better for the industry, ultimately. So, yeah, it's a whatever. Just let us know if the 900 versus the 1,200. But I think it's pretty straightforward that dispensaries are cool at 600. So, and again, if those are just numbers I decided on based on the rule of three. So,
You still have,
not the kind of rule of three that y'all are thinking about now, but just like 6, 9, 12 anyway.
Councilor Patron.
I can see not having, like I say, growing to me just seems like that it's clearly a lot more staff hours, it's gonna remain hazmat complicated. Like I can see that not being discounted any year. It's gonna remain difficult and dealing with, health inspections and all of that stuff that goes along with it. But I do think that dispensary, having been on the flip side of this, not for dispensary necessarily, but for continuing to pay a fee that I know there was a lot of hours put in the first year and none every year after that, and you continue to pay the same amount. So I really feel like, maybe a 25% discount for dispensary, and if we need to up the fees, we up the fees, but erring on the side of, they don't need to pay for something that we're not putting in the hours.
Can I just follow up? Do you mind? Okay, so if I just don't think we have enough data to say, like, they're not putting in the same hours, you know what I mean? Like you said you owned a liquor store, and that's been a long time, like people have had liquor stores and visiting liquor stores, the dispensaries and
What are we gonna do about
cannabis
education and
education and the
we
research?
don't have any.
And I guess that's
hours.
a really good question also, because we are adding the research and education, and the other one, do they have to go through the COC process? And so are we going to require a $850 license for them as well?
Right now it's $250, isn't it?
yeah, your current ordinance that's before you has testing laboratory at $850, research facility at $250, educational facility $250, storage facility $850.
Is that agreeable for staff? Is that what y'all
Testing would be up there with growing, it would seem like, because you're gonna have to meet a really high threshold to not get people sick. That's something to me I can see, like growing, you're getting into health department stuff.
So you think we should
But
have that?
I just wanna make sure that it's commensurate with the amount of work that goes into it and not,
It sounds like we might need some staff recommendations on the tiered structure. And you mentioned getting feedback from staff about how much is going into each one. I feel like we're kind of shooting at the dark right now, and it'd be helpful to have that. Obviously, we don't have a lot of time on that. Do you think this is something you could compile and email to us by the end of the week? And then someone could make a motion to amend with what their recommendations are? Because we're not going to get the answers we need right now.
Can I make a suggestion?
Councilmember Wilson?
Can we set the fees based on, can we just get the fees figured out and do a revisit yearly as, instead of like
I agree.
trying to,
I just think the goal is to give it our best shot now, since we're already looking at it. But I agree. I think as we get data and whatnot, it's going to have to be revisited. This is completely brand new. It's not the alcohol business. It's not any other kind of licensing. It's brand new in our
all
state.
of the fees need to be revisited.
And they will be,
Alcohol
and they will
included.
be. But for now, I think that's the point, Councilor Wilson, is we're just trying to do
we
our
gotta
best.
get something
Yeah.
Tuesday. We have to have something on the books, right? As a
Correct.
city, we have to have an ordinance that complies with state law.
And $100 we know is not cutting it.
And $100 isn't cutting it.
Councilmember Bierman.
So I think the 6, 9, and 12 for dispensary grower processor seems, from what we know,
Processor.
fair enough. Again, considering what we know. I think if we're going to be doing that, then testing facilities, any kind of research facility goes in line with processor. Similar type of equipment, similar type of inspection. I think that storage facility, educational facility, for this year, we set at the same level as a dispensary.
I was thinking the
I
same
second
thing.
that.
Yeah.
And then
third.
those, I mean, now, and then we can, maybe in a year, maybe it's in 18 months, maybe it's when we have started getting a boatload of feedback about changes that other communities are making, we can revisit it. But I think that if we're going to be okay with 6, 9, and 12, I think these new categories fit fairly well with that 6, 9, and 12. I think we're good to go.
Okay, so I'm hearing we like the 6, 9, and 12. We want to put the new categories not oddly low, but in one of those based on what they're similar to. I'm hearing there is interest in a possible reduction for a renewal year. I'd like to see what that looks like. And then when it comes to the massive amount of zoning changes, it sounds like we're also interested in, that's just going to have to take time because we're going to have to go through the whole process again. And we're going to call OMA to see, hey, do you have an actual, interpretation of this? Because otherwise we're
Or will
creating-
you?
Or will you? Yeah. Otherwise we're just creating work for ourselves without all the information.
They can't enforce something they don't have a definition for.
I agree.
So.
That's on them. And they have a responsibility. If they're going to put it on us to do all of this, they need to help us at least a little bit.
We've become like a de facto.
So,
Like people come to the dispensaries for questions because nobody can get the OMMA to ever answer the phone. So like dispensaries are all like de facto information stops now.
well, and if they don't have the information, I suppose we trailblaze a little bit and let other communities model what we're doing and make them answer. But for now, we have to act.
Go up there.
That's right. Send a strongly worded letter. Any other comments from council?
I'm with Kate.
Yeah.
Okay.
Same.
Jane, Beth, do you guys have what you need from us?
Yes.
All right.
Thank
We
you
are
guys
adjourned.
for all your
Yes, thank you.
Fun.
And you're right.